Our journey begins nearly 500 million years ago in a world entirely alien to our own. During the Ordovician period, the continents we know today were huddled together in strange configurations. At first glance, the land seems completely devoid of life, a silent desert of rock and dust. Only the tiniest green patches of liverworts and mosses begin to cling to the damp edges of the world. DG Peter checks his oxygen sensors, finding the air thin and difficult to breathe in this early era. Oxygen levels here hover at a mere 14%, far below the modern standards we require. However, the true spectacle of this age lies hidden beneath the surface of the warm, shallow seas. As he submerges, a vibrant empire of marine life explodes into view. This is the Great Ordovician Biodiversification Event, a golden age for underwater evolution. Legions of trilobites scuttle across the sand, looking like ancient armored horseshoe crabs. But where there is life this abundant, there are always those who hunt it. A massive orthocone cephalopod drifts silently through the water, its 6-meter shell like a spear. Its large, intelligent eyes lock onto a nearby group of trilobites with predatory precision. With a sudden burst, the tentacles lash out, snatching a helpless creature from the seafloor. For millions of years, this underwater paradise remained stable and thriving. But the earth beneath the waves is never truly still. The supercontinent Gondwana begins a slow, relentless drift toward the South Pole. As the land reaches the frozen axis of the world, the global climate begins to buckle. Massive glaciers begin to form, locking away the planet's water in vast sheets of ice. DigiPeter watches in shock as the shoreline begins to recede at an impossible speed. The shallow seas, once the cradle of life, are literally draining away. Thousands of trilobites are left stranded on the muddy flats, their gills gasping in the air. The once mighty orthocones are trapped in shrinking pools, their massive bodies too heavy to move. Temperatures plummet by 5 degrees Celsius across the entire globe. The warm-blooded luxury of the previous era is replaced by a brutal, biting frost. Atmospheric carbon dioxide levels drop sharply, further cooling the dying planet. DigiPeter walks past mountains of dead shells, the stench of decay frozen into the air. 85% of all marine species are being erased from history in real time. He searches for food, but the vibrant ecosystems have been replaced by barren ice. He is a solitary ghost in a world that has forgotten how to support life. The cold seeps through his suit, draining his power and his will to move. Nearby, the frozen carcass of a giant orthocone serves as a grim monument to the collapse. The first marine empires have fallen not to a predator, but to the very climate that birthed them. DigiPeter knows he must leave this freezing tomb before his systems shut down forever. A massive crack echoes through the air as the glacier beneath him begins to shift. He falls into the darkness, the roar of grinding ice drowning out his cries. Everything goes black as the weight of the prehistoric winter collapses around him. But death is only the beginning of this traveler's long journey through the extinction of Earth. As the Ordovician Ice Age ends, a new threat is already taking root in the warming soil of the future. Beneath the deceptive green of the coming era, a different kind of suffocation is waiting to claim its next victim. We emerge into the late Devonian period, a world that looks remarkably more familiar than the frozen wastes of the past. Vegetation has finally conquered the land, draping the continents in a thick, vibrant cloak of emerald green. DigiPeter wanders through these odd but beautiful forests, finding the air rich with life-giving oxygen. There are no dinosaurs here yet, leaving the landscape eerily quiet and strangely peaceful. Beneath the surface of the nearby coastal waters, the age of fishes is reaching its magnificent peak. Massive reefs are now home to the first jawed predators, including the terrifying armored placoderms. These monsters grow up to 10 meters long, sporting heavy bony jaws that can crush almost anything. In the shadows of these giants, our own ancestors are evolving as humble lobe-finned fish. Soon, creatures like Chicxulub will attempt the impossible, dragging themselves onto the muddy banks. Digipeter builds a small shelter from the abundant wood, settling in to watch life flourish. For a few million years, the Earth seems to have found a perfect, stable rhythm. But the very success of the land plants is about to become the planet's undoing. Trees have evolved deep roots and seeds for the first time in history. These roots break down the ancient stone, releasing a massive surge of minerals and nutrients into the rivers. The sudden influx of fertilizer triggers an explosion of microscopic life in the seas. Vibrant green algal blooms begin to carpet the coastal waters, blocking out the sun. As the algae dies and rots, it consumes every last molecule of oxygen in the water. This phenomenon, known as anoxia, begins to turn the thriving oceans into vast liquid graveyards. Digipeter notices the change as the once plentiful fish start washing up on his beach. The smell of rotting algae and decaying meat becomes an inescapable, heavy fog. Over the next 20 million years, a series of these pulses will wipe out 75% of all species. The mighty armored placoderms, once the kings of the sea, simply vanish from the fossil record. Food becomes scarce for Digipeter as the marine ecosystem he relied on collapses. He is forced to scavenge for whatever scraps the dying tides leave behind. In a moment of extreme hunger, he consumes the flesh of a rotting, sun-baked trilobite. The ancient bacteria within the carcass prove far more lethal than any predator. His journey in the Devonian ends not with a bang, but with a horrific case of prehistoric food poisoning. But as one traveler falls, the world continues its slow, agonizing march toward an even greater catastrophe. We fast forward another 100 million years, where the continents have fused into the supercontinent Pangaea. This new world is a pressure cooker of heat and strange, mammal-like reptiles. Digipeter rematerializes in this harsh landscape, immediately sensing a heat far worse than the Devonian sun. Giant sail-backed creatures like Dimetrodon patrol the fern-filled marshes nearby. But the animals are not the greatest threat in this era of volcanic instability. In the distance, the very ground begins to tremble with a frequency that vibrates through the bone. Huge plumes of ash start to blot out the sun, turning the sky a bruised, bloody red. This is the start of the Great Dying, the most absolute wipeout life has ever faced. The air begins to smell like rotten eggs, a sign that the atmosphere itself is turning poisonous. Acid rain begins to fall, sizzling against the skin and stripping the very leaves from the trees. Digipeter searches for shelter as the temperature rises to levels that no mammal could survive. As the first wave of molten rock crests the nearby ridge, he realizes the fire is only the beginning of the nightmare. As the first wave of molten rock crests the nearby ridge, he realizes the fire is only the beginning of the nightmare. 100 million years have passed since the Devonian, bringing us to the age of the supercontinent, Pangaea. Lush ferns and primitive plants blanket the interior, creating a deceptive paradise for the new masters of the land. Strange amphibians and early reptiles scuttle through the undergrowth, representing the cutting edge of evolution. Digipeter spots a Dimetrodon basking in a clearing, its massive neural sail catching the afternoon heat. This predator looks like a dinosaur, but it is actually a mammal-like reptile that lived 40 million years before them. Nearby, a Gorgonopsid prowls the shadows, resembling a saber-toothed tiger that hasn't quite finished evolving. These creatures are part of a world that is about to be systematically erased from the face of the Earth. The catastrophe begins 252 million years ago when the region we now call Siberia literally explodes. The Siberian traps become a site of inconceivable volcanic activity, spewing lava for hundreds of thousands of years. Digipeter is forced into a constant state of flight, dodging slow-moving but relentless rivers of molten rock. The air grows heavy with billions of tons of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide pumping into the sky. Greenhouse gases cause global temperatures to skyrocket, turning the entire planet into a furnace. The oceans begin to boil and lose their ability to hold oxygen, suffocating the marine life within. A foul stench of rotten eggs fills the world as sulfur-producing bacteria thrive in the stagnant waters. Then comes the acid rain, a corrosive downpour that begins to strip the very leaves from the trees. The magnificent forests of Pangaea begin to wither and die, leaving behind a skeletal landscape of gray wood. Over 96% of all marine species are extinguished, marking the closest life has ever come to total failure. On land, the statistics are nearly as grim, with 70% of all lineages vanishing forever. Digipeter finds himself in a world where the water has the acidity of high-test vinegar. There is nothing left to eat but the charred remains of a world that was once vibrant and full of life. He is not alone in his hunger, as other desperate predators hunt him through the desiccated ruins. A pack of starving Gorgonopsids closes in, their ribs showing through their mangy hides. He runs until his lungs burn with the sting of ash, but there is no escape from the great dying. As he collapses from exhaustion, the predators finally tear into him before they too succumb to the toxic air. The Permian extinction was the ultimate reset button, nearly ending the experiment of life on Earth. Yet, in the cracks of the basalt and the depths of the acid seas, a few resilient survivors cling to existence. It will take millions of years for the planet to recover and for the temperature to stabilize. We transition forward to the Triassic period, where a new world is being built on the bones of the old. Digipeter returns, his digital essence restored to find the ancestors of the dinosaurs beginning to roam. The supercontinent Pangaea is no longer a single stable mass, it is starting to pull itself apart. This tectonic upheaval brings back a familiar foe, massive volcanic activity. While this extinction is not as severe as the Great Dying, it still reshapes the biological landscape. Digipeter tries to avoid the giant archosaurs that now dominate the land. Unlike previous events, some species seem remarkably unaffected by the shifting climate. For a moment, it seems Digipeter might actually survive this era with plenty of food and water available. But the stability of the Triassic is an illusion, a brief pause before the next great filter. The ground begins to tremble with a frequency that suggests something more than just a volcano is coming. From the depths of the jungle, a roar echoes that sounds like a hybrid of a crocodile and a T-Rex. As a pair of serrated daggers glint in the moonlight, Digipeter realizes he is no longer the hunter, but the prey for an apex predator yet to be named. The moonlight reflects off the jagged teeth of the stalker as I press my back against a scorched basalt pillar. I hold my breath, watching the predator's silhouette vanish into the thick, sulfurous fog of the early Triassic. Millions of years pass in a blur of digital static as I calibrate my suit to a world that is slowly healing from the Great Dying. The supercontinent of Pangaea stretches endlessly before me, a monolithic landmass dominated by vast, arid deserts.
I noticed the first signs of life returning in the form of hardy seed ferns clinging to the edges of seasonal riverbeds.
A low rumble vibrates through the ground, signaling the immense tectonic forces pulling the Earth apart beneath my feet. Deep beneath the crust, the mantle churns, beginning the slow process of rifting that will eventually create the Atlantic Ocean. In the distance, a small bipedal creature darts across the dunes with a speed I haven't seen in this era before. This is the Eoraptor, one of the earliest ancestors of the giants that will soon rule the planet. It represents a radical shift in biological design, trading heavy armor for agility and metabolic efficiency. I follow the tracks of the Eoraptor into a valley where the air feels heavy with the scent of pine and ozone. Massive conifer forests now dominate the highlands, providing a new vertical dimension to the recovering ecosystem. Suddenly, the ground heaves violently as a massive rift opens just meters from where I stand. Molten rock begins to seep from the wound in the earth, a reminder that the Triassic is far from stable. I scramble up a rocky ridge to gain a better vantage point of the spreading Central Atlantic magmatic province. The scale of the volcanism is staggering, threatening to trigger yet another climate catastrophe for the nascent dinosaur lineages. A massive herbivore, a Placerius, bellows in distress as it is trapped between the advancing lava and the cliff. I watch helplessly as the ancient synapsid is swallowed by the heat, a victim of the planet's violent rebirth. I must move forward to find the apex of this era's biological revolution before the atmosphere becomes toxic. Rain begins to fall, but it is acidic, sizzling as it hits the hot basaltic rocks. Despite the acid, the first true dinosaurs like Chicxulub are thriving, their bodies built to withstand these extremes. They are hollow-boned and bird-like, a design that allows them to hunt where others simply tried to survive. I enter a cave to seek shelter from the worsening storm, but I am not alone in the darkness. The eyes of a Postosuchus gleam in the corner, its massive crocodile-like jaws ready to snap. I back away slowly, realizing that dinosaurs are not yet the undisputed masters of this world. Outside, the storm has cleared, revealing a sky filled with more carbon dioxide than Earth has seen in millions of years. This greenhouse effect is fueling the rapid growth of the lush jungles that define the late Triassic. I walk through a grove of giant horsetails that tower 30 feet above my head. The sound of breaking branches echoes through the canopy, indicating something massive is moving nearby. A long neck emerges from the foliage belonging to a Plateosaurus, one of the first prosauropods. It stands on two legs to reach the highest leaves, showcasing the versatility of early dinosaur anatomy. The peaceful scene is interrupted as the ground begins to crack again, this time with a deafening roar of escaping gas. The Plateosaurus panics, stampeding through the underbrush as the very air begins to burn. I check my suit's integrity as the temperature spikes, sensing the approach of the end of the Triassic period. This rifting event is not just local, it is a planetary scar that will reshape the world for the Jurassic. I walk through the charred remains of the horsetail forest, where life is once again being tested by fire. Only the most adaptable will survive the coming transition into the golden age of giants. I find a small, feathered dinosaur hiding in a log, a herald of the biological wonders to come. The air is cooling, but the tectonic instability is only just beginning to peak. As the sun sets on the Triassic, a massive earthquake throws me to the ground and I see the horizon glowing with a light that shouldn't be there. I wake up to find the horizon no longer glowing with fire, but with the lush, vibrant green of a world reborn. Millions of years have passed since the Triassic collapse, ushering in the golden age of the dinosaurs. The air is thick and warm, smelling of damp earth and sweet nectar from the first true flowers. High above, the sky is no longer empty, filled with the leathery wings of massive pterosaurs. Every step I take through the undergrowth feels heavy with the weight of unseen eyes watching me. The sound of snapping branches echoes through the trees, signaling the movement of something enormous. To be a mammal in this era is to be nothing more than a bite-sized snack for a hungry predator. Suddenly, a pack of Deinonychus bursts into the open, their sickle claws flashing in the sun. I scramble back into the shadows, hoping my suit's camouflage holds against their keen senses. They aren't interested in me yet, as they have set their sights on a much larger prize. The struggle is brief but violent, a reminder of the raw, unfiltered nature of this world. I move away from the carnage, heading toward the coast where the air is cooler. The ocean here is a brilliant turquoise, but its beauty hides terrors just as great as those on land. A massive mosasaur breaches the surface, its jaws wide enough to swallow a boat whole. I find a sheltered cove and prepare to set up a temporary camp to observe the wildlife. This period is the warmest Earth has been in hundreds of millions of years. The heat is oppressive, making even the simplest tasks feel like an endurance test. Outside, a herd of Parasaurolophus begins to trumpet, their crests amplifying the sound across the bay. For a moment, the world feels stable, as if this reign of giants could last forever. But I know the history of this planet all too well. Stability is always an illusion. A low rumble shakes the cave floor, and it isn't from a dinosaur's footstep. I check my sensors, but they show no tectonic activity nearby. The birds and smaller reptiles suddenly fall silent, a chilling hush descending over the jungle. Something is coming, a threat that even the mighty T-Rex cannot fight. I climb to a high vantage point on the cliffs to get a better view of the horizon. The biodiversity of this late Cretaceous world is at its absolute peak. But the higher the peak, the more devastating the coming fall will be. A sudden flash of light in the upper atmosphere catches my eye. It's not a shooting star, it's too large, too slow, and far too bright. My suit's AI begins screaming warnings about a massive thermal anomaly approaching the planet. Below me, the herd of Edmontosaurus begins to panic, their bellows echoing in the pre-dawn chill. The ground begins to vibrate again, a continuous hum that rattles my teeth. Far out at sea, the water begins to retreat from the shore, exposing the dark, muddy seabed. I realize I'm standing at the very end of an era, a witness to the final moments of the giants. The sky is turning a sickly shade of orange as the atmosphere begins to compress under the incoming weight. I need to find deep shelter, but there is nowhere on this planet that will be safe from what is coming. A massive shadow falls over the land as the asteroid blocks out the morning sun. The wind begins to howl, a hot, dry gale that smells of ozone and burning rock. I look toward the Gulf of Mexico, seeing a light that is brighter than 1,000 suns. As the shockwave hits the atmosphere, the sky itself seems to shatter, and I know this is the end of everything I see. As the shockwave hits the atmosphere, the sky itself seems to shatter, and I know this is the end of everything I see. High above the clouds, a mountain of rock 10 kilometers wide tears through the air at 20 kilometers per second. The air itself ignites as the friction of the descent turns the atmosphere into a pressurized furnace. In an instant of impossible force, the asteroid strikes the shallow waters of the Gulf, vaporizing everything it touches. A thermal pulse radiates outward, turning the lush paradise into a scorched wasteland in a matter of seconds. Within 1,500 kilometers of the impact site, life is not just killed, it is simply erased. Following the heat comes the shock wave, a wall of compressed air moving faster than the speed of sound. I watch as the ocean itself is pushed back, forming tsunamis hundreds of meters high that race toward the shore. The impact crater ejects trillions of tons of molten rock and vaporized crust back into the sky. This debris begins to rain back down across the entire planet, turning the sky into a grill. Everywhere I look, the forests are catching fire simultaneously from the heat of the falling ejecta. The majestic creatures that once ruled this land are now helpless against a foe they cannot fight. Hurricane-force winds blast through the burning remains, carrying the soot of a dying world. The ground beneath my feet continues to tremble as the impact triggers massive earthquakes across the globe. The sun, once the bringer of life, is slowly blotted out by a rising shroud of dust and sulfur. I feel the temperature begin to drop as the initial heat gives way to a chilling darkness. The tsunamis reach the far continents, drowning coastal ecosystems in a final saltwater surge. The silence that follows the initial roar is more terrifying than the noise itself. Trillions of tons of sulfur aerosols are now reflecting the sun's energy back into space. I wander through the graveyard of giants, seeing the bodies of creatures that had no warning. The air tastes of acid and metal, a toxic cocktail that stings the lungs with every breath. This is the threshold of the Great Darkness, where the food chain begins to snap at its base. I see a small mammal scurrying into a burrow, perhaps the only ones with a chance to survive. The impact didn't just end a day, it ended an entire geological era in a single afternoon. The oceans are beginning to turn acidic as the carbon and sulfur settle into the waves.
I must find shelter, for the rain that is starting to fall is not water, but concentrated acid.
The world is a monochromatic ruin, a shadow of the vibrant kingdom it was hours ago. The apex predators are starving now, their prey either dead or vaporized by the initial blast. This was the day the music of the Cretaceous died, replaced by the howling of the wind. Above the soot, the planet is ringing like a bell from the force of the strike. The sky turns a deep, bruised purple as the soot reaches the highest levels of the atmosphere. I see distant flashes of lightning, but they carry no promise of life-giving rain. The extinction is no longer a localized event. It is a global, biological reset. My suit's sensors are screaming about the lack of oxygen and the rise in CO2. The giants of the sea are following the land dwellers into the abyss of time. Every ecosystem is collapsing like a house of cards in the wake of the Chicxulub hammer. I must prepare for the longest night the planet has ever known. The fires are dying down, but they are leaving behind a world that is freezing and hungry. The golden age of the dinosaurs is officially over, and the era of survivors has begun. But as I turn to find a way out, I realize the ground isn't just shaking from the impact anymore. Something massive is moving in the dark. I scramble backward as the charred remains of the canopy groan and collapse into the thick, choking soot. The massive movement in the darkness reveals itself as a dying Triceratops, its skin horribly scorched and peeling. It collapses with a thud that vibrates through my boots, kicking up a fresh cloud of toxic dust. Looking up, the sky is no longer blue, but a bruised purple, choked by trillions of tons of pulverized rock. A sudden, unnatural chill begins to seep through my suit as the sun's warmth is completely severed from the surface. This is the beginning of the nuclear winter, a global shroud that will last for years. Without sunlight, the remaining green plants, already scorched, begin to wither and undergo a final mass expiration. I check my internal sensors, which indicate a sharp drop in atmospheric oxygen as photosynthesis grinds to a halt. A small herd of Edmontosaurus wanders past me, their bellows sounding weak and hollow in the thin air. They try to nuzzle the ash-covered ground, searching for a single blade of grass that hasn't been vaporized. The starvation is not a quick death, it is a slow, agonizing wasting away of the world's giants. From the shadows, a Tyrannosaurus rex emerges, but it is no longer the proud apex predator of the Golden Age. It ignores me, its glazed eyes fixed only on the fresh carcass of the Triceratops. The smell of decay and sulfur is overwhelming, sticking to the visor of my helmet like a physical weight. In the oceans, the collapse is even more total, as the acidified water dissolves the base of the food chain. Massive mosasaurs drift aimlessly in the dark, their bellies empty as the reefs they once patrolled turn into boneyards. Back on land, acid rain begins to fall, a corrosive drizzle that stings any exposed skin. The landscape is transforming into a monochromatic nightmare where the concept of day has been forgotten. I hear a scuttling sound beneath a pile of rubble and instinctively raise my light. A small, furry creature with bright, darting eyes looks back at me for a split second before vanishing. While the giants starve, these small mammals find safety in the cracks, eating insects and roots the others cannot reach. But even their survival is a gamble in a world where the very air is becoming a poison. I struggle up a ridge, my movements slowed by the thick layer of sludge that the ash and rain have created. From this height, I can see the distant fires of the impact zone still burning like an angry red wound on the horizon. The silence is absolute broken, only by the occasional groan of a falling tree or the whistle of a freezing wind. I pass a dried-up riverbed where hundreds of pterosaurs lie with their wings folded, never to take flight again. Their delicate respiratory systems were no match for the particulate matter clogging the sky. Months have passed in this twilight, and the temperature continues to plummet as the heat of the impact fades into the ice of the winter. I find a hollowed-out tree for shelter, my energy cells flickering as the cold drains my life support. The extinction rate is climbing towards 75%, erasing the dominant lineages of the last 150 million years. Suddenly, the ground beneath my shelter begins to vibrate with a rhythmic, heavy thumping. I peer out and see a massive shadow moving through the fog, larger than any dinosaur I've seen today. It is a scavenger, a titanosaur that has somehow survived the heat, but is now a walking mountain of bone and hanging skin. It lets out a long, low moan that sounds like the earth itself is crying out in pain. It falls just yards from my hiding place, and the impact creates a tremor that nearly collapses my shelter. I realize I cannot stay here. The environment is becoming too unstable for even a digital traveler to survive. The air begins to crackle with static, a sign of massive atmospheric shifts that precede a final collapse. I start to run, my boots kicking up the remains of a world that no longer exists. The ground starts to split open as tectonic stresses from the impact finally reach this region. I reach the edge of a cliff, only to see that the ocean below is rising at an impossible speed, carrying with it the wreckage of a continent. The relentless rising of the sea finally begins to slow as the Earth stabilizes its chaotic rhythm. I step back from the precipice, my boots crunching against the layer of soot that covers the world. Through the haze of the nuclear winter, a faint pale light begins to pierce the heavy cloud cover. The age of giants has ended, leaving behind a silence so profound it feels heavy. I notice a small movement near a pile of blackened rocks, a tiny spark of life in the wasteland. A small, furry creature with bright, darting eyes emerges from its burrow to sniff the cooling air. These tiny survivors, the mammals, are the heirs to a planet that no longer belongs to the dinosaurs. Without the pressure of reptilian predators, these creatures will begin an unprecedented evolutionary journey. The mass extinction was a reset button, clearing the stage for a new cast of characters. The acidic rain has stopped, and the air carries the scent of damp earth instead of sulfur. I see the first flowers blooming in the cracks of the craters, a symbol of life's incredible resilience. The oceans, once toxic and empty, begin to teem with new forms of life as the pH levels normalize. We have witnessed the fall of 5 great empires, each destroyed by the very planet that birthed them. But from every collapse, life has found a way to bridge the gap and emerge stronger. I think of the trilobites, the armored fish, and the mighty T-Rex, now only shadows in the stone. My journey through time is nearing its end, and I feel a profound connection to this cycle of death and rebirth. As I vanish back into the digital ether, I know that our existence is the ultimate legacy of these 5 great extinctions. We are the survivors of the impossible, standing on the shoulders of the giants that fell before us. The story of life is not defined by its ends, but by its incredible ability to start over. And so, the chronicled ends lead us back to the very beginning of our own story.